Milo, an original short story.
Milo, Milo, why did you run away, Milo? Come back, Milo, please, please come back home.
Grandma was a sweet soul. She always treated Lucy and her little brother Timmy well, even though she could never quite remember their names, or even the fact that they were her grandkids. So, it made Lucy sad whenever Grandma went into this sorry state. It would happen without warning. She could be solemn, or laughing, or on the brink of dozing off one moment, and in the next she would be sobbing silently and uttering the name Milo in absolute anguish for hours and hours. In this state, she was totally inconsolable. She wouldn't eat, drink, or even talk to anyone, and only reverted back to her normal self after she forgot what she was crying about in the first place. Either that, or she would just tire herself out until she fell asleep, and when she woke up she would be alright again. Milo was the name of a pup that belonged to Grandma when she was still a little girl. Of course, Lucy didn't learn about this from Grandma herself. The one time she untactfully asked Grandma about it, the poor thing immediately broke down again in distress, and Mom and Dad were furious. Ever since that incident, the word Milo was strictly forbidden in Grandma's presence. In the end, it was Dad who explained the story to Lucy and Timmy. Apparently, Grandma lost a pup long ago and never really got over it. And judging by how much it haunted her, she probably blamed herself for the incident. Perhaps she forgot to close the gate at night, and Milo ran off, never to return.
Did Grandma tell you this, Dad?
Lucy had asked skeptically. She couldn't imagine how he would have been able to coax the information out of her.
No, not really,
admitted Dad. It turned out that Dad had deduced the whole thing from an old family photograph of Grandma's. Upon request, Dad had then produced it from an ancient album so that Lucy and Timmy could inspect it themselves. The photo was taken in a period before color cameras had been invented, probably sometime during the war. In it contained Dad's grandparents, little girl Grandma standing in between them, and a tiny mongrel that she was hugging preciously against her chest. Grandma must have been around Lucy's age at the time. Presumably, that mongrel was Milo, and from the looks of it, she did seem to love him very much.
Oh, it must have devastated Grandma when she lost Milo,
said Lucy, thinking about how sad she would be if Fluffy, their pet rabbit of 4 years, had gone missing.
I want to help Grandma find Milo again,
said Timmy, squinting hard at the photograph, as if trying to recall if he had seen the mongrel somewhere before.
He could still be out there, you know, lost and hungry.
Lucy's little brother had a heart of gold, but he wasn't old enough to know that dogs don't live as long as people, and she didn't have the heart to tell him. From then on, he was constantly on the lookout for Grandma's lost pup whenever they were outdoors, until Mom, unable to bear it any longer, finally sat Timmy down and taught him about the unfortunate difference in lifespan between pets and their owners. Poor Timmy bawled his eyes out on that day. One night, as Dad was getting ready to tell them a bedtime story, Timmy suddenly asked,
Daddy, what was Grandma like when she was little? Because in the photo she doesn't seem very happy.
Dad adjusted his glasses and put down the book he was about to read from.
Well, I don't claim to know much about Grandma's early years,
But I suppose if I were living through the horrible Japanese occupation, I wouldn't be very happy either. The Japanese occupation was an event during the war that Lucy and Timmy's parents often alluded to with an air of seriousness, but never really told them about in detail.
Didn't Grandma ever tell you stories about her childhood?
Asked Lucy. Dad scratched his head. Grandma has always been mysterious about her past. I don't think even Grandpa knew much about this subject, to be honest.
Grandpa, who had passed away 3 years ago, had been married to Grandma for nearly half a century. If even he didn't know much, Lucy wondered, what chance did the rest of them have?
As you both know, Dad continued, my grandparents, Grandma's mother and father, did not survive the occupation. Grandma lost everything to the war. Her home, her family, and I presume her puppy as well. It's no surprise that she was reluctant to talk about her past, even when her memory was still serving her fine. In fact, I've never even heard her mention Milo's name before, at least not until she was diagnosed with dementia and started having these, fits. Of all the memories the illness chose to leave intact, he sighed.
Lucy realized chillingly that Grandma must have lost everyone else in the photograph not long after it was taken. Her mom, Dad, and Milo, all three robbed from her in one fell stroke. Just how bad were things during the occupation, Dad? She asked.
Well, I expect you'll learn about the watered-down version at some point in your history classes, but things were pretty darn horrible at that time, said Dad gravely. He hesitated briefly before continuing. Battalions of soldiers were stationed at every village to ensure not a single blade of grass could flutter without the army knowing. The soldiers made everyone follow the harsh rules set by the Japanese military, and disobedience was met with swift punishment. Not that they needed an excuse to hurt people, though. They already do that on a regular basis for sport. The rations they doled out was barely enough for the villagers to not starve. Furthermore, a strict curfew was imposed, and anyone who broke it, young or old, suffered serious consequences.
Curfew? Serious consequences for disobedience? That doesn't sound too different from our household, quipped Lucy, which earned a chuckle from Timmy, but not from Dad.
You will do well not to make light of what your ancestors had to go through in the war, young lady, he replied sternly. Some of the things the Japanese did to our women and children. They are so cruel that I can't even tell you about them until you're older. Tens of thousands of people lost their lives, and so many families like your grandma's were torn apart.
An uncomfortable silence followed. Timmy looked like he was about to burst into tears.
Sorry, Dad got a little carried away there. Dad apologized. What's important now is Grandma made it through the ordeal, which is why all of us are here today. She might not look like it now, but my mother is the strongest, bravest woman I know. We should all be proud of her. And that concludes tonight's story. Good night, kids.
Dad hastily tucked them both into bed and left. In the next few weeks, Grandma's dementia seemed to take a turn for the worse. She would often forget where she was, when it was, and spend a lot of her time in an increasingly confused mood. Sometimes she even had trouble recognizing Dad, and although he tried not to show it, Lucy could tell that it
broke his heart to see his own mother like this. As the disease progressed, Grandma slipped more and more frequently into what Lucy now called the Milo state, and she took longer to recover as well. It was not long before she'd reached a point where she was spending more time mourning the loss of Milo than doing anything else. Because she wouldn't touch food or drink in the Milo state, her physical health deteriorated rapidly along with her mental condition. The situation was despondent. Medication didn't work. Everyone in the family was deeply affected by how badly Grandma was suffering, but no one knew what to do. One day, Grandma went to sleep in the Milo state and woke up still in the Milo state.
This is bad,
said Dad.
This is really, really bad.
Mom tried her best to get Grandma to eat by preparing her favorite dishes, but it was like Grandma didn't even notice the food. Words failed to elicit the slightest response from her. She wouldn't even budge from her armchair, where she just sat with her face buried in her hands, sobbing and sobbing.
Kids, stay here and look after Grandma. Mom and I are going downtown to fetch a doctor,
Dad finally decided. Lucy and Timmy were left with a difficult situation. After all, how do you look after someone who is already in so much emotional turmoil when there's nothing you can do to help her? Timmy knelt beside Grandma, trying in vain to comfort her. Lucy was too depressed to do anything. She just sat on the sofa opposite to Grandma, studying her pain and wondering what exactly had gone down with Milo that caused such insurmountable grief. Just how much did Grandma love her dog, really? Whatever did happen, it really seemed like Grandma was reliving the episode again and again, as though it had just occurred. This wasn't the wistful mourning of a long-gone loved one. It was the intense shock of a fresh loss. It was truly tragic. But then, that gave Lucy an idea. Lucy and Timmy were brisk walking home from Mrs. Lee's house a couple of blocks away. Mrs. Lee's dog, Bella, had recently given birth to a litter of pups, and she had been putting them up for adoption for weeks now.
Come on, Timmy. We've got to get home before Mom and Dad does.
Timmy scuffled along as quickly as he could, but his attention was preoccupied with the puppy he was cradling in his arms.
Your name is Milo now. Got it?
Timmy said, stroking the puppy's head affectionately.
Milo. Milo. Milo, Milo, Milo.
Milo wagged his stubby tail in response. They had chosen the puppy that bore the closest resemblance to the mongrel in the photograph. It was still miles from a perfect copy, as the breed was quite different. Moreover, there was no way of knowing if the color of the fur was right, but Lucy had hoped that Grandma's lack of facial recognition skills extended to dogs as well.
This is so clever of you, Lucy,
praised Timmy excitedly.
Grandma's going to be so happy.
Lucy wasn't so sure herself. Her plan could backfire horribly in numerous ways. She still felt guilty about the last time her insensitivity sent Grandma into the Milo state. If this did not go well, the results could be a lot worse.
Well, it's worth a shot,
she said, trying to sound confident. Once they got home, Lucy burst into the living room first, where Grandma was still seated, glum as ever.
Grandma, look,
she cried.
We found Milo. Milo is here.
Timmy let Milo down onto the floor so he could run around. The puppy was tentative at first, being in an unfamiliar environment and all, but it soon bounded happily into the living room following Timmy's lead, leaving a trail of tiny paw prints behind. Grandma took one glance at the direction of the pup, who was running towards her alongside Timmy, and the change in her countenance was incredible. Her cheery eyes lit up immediately, her jaw hung open, and every feature of her face contorted into an expression of incredulity. Lucy held her breath. In the next few seconds, Grandma moved faster than Lucy had ever seen her do her entire life, as if galvanized by some invisible force. The 80-year-old woman sprang up from her armchair, stumbled forward in huge strides, and threw her arms around Timmy.
"Oh, Milo, you've come home,"
she cried, embracing Timmy so tightly that Lucy was afraid he might choke.
I was so worried. Pa and Ma were so upset when we couldn't find you. And we looked and looked for days and days. I'm so sorry I let you run off in the dark, Milo. You were only a little boy. You didn't know better, and I should have watched over you more carefully. I know I should have. I'm sorry. I promise I won't let you out of my sight again, Milo. I've got you. I'll take good care of you this time. I promise.
Grandma, that's not...
Lucy began, confused, but she trailed off as the truth of the situation gradually dawned upon her. Timmy was probably still unclear about what was happening, but thankfully he had a heart of gold, the precious boy. He returned the hug and kissed Grandma on her tear-stained cheek.
Yes, I'm home.
He said softly.
Milo has come home.